a zombie hunter who blurred the lines between cosplay and reality. People were shocked as their favorite cosplay celebrity turned out to be a real-life slayer. A zombie hunter cosplayer cruelly decapitated his victims, much like any zombie enthusiast knows. When Detective Clark Schwarzkopf picked up a 90s unsolved cold case, he was expecting to face someone truly evil, but he was shocked when he found himself seated across a struggling single father, mild-mannered and loving toward his daughter. Surely this man could not be the one. Ryan Patrick Miller was famous for being the zombie slayer. He dressed up in steampunk, merging Victorian-era elegance with Wild West or futuristic elements. Sporting goggles, a sizable fake firearm, and a modified decommissioned police vehicle, his ensemble was nothing short of theatrical. Everyone thought Brian was a regular guy. Though he invested heavily in the old cop vehicle, he seemed like an average, somewhat reserved man. He enjoyed cosplaying as a zombie hunter, going to comic conventions, and basking in the spotlight. He remained level-headed and seldom drank. 42-year-old Brian was so famous that his zombie hunter gun was displayed at Sky Harbor International Airport for a steampunk exhibit called Steampunk: The Exquisite Adventure. Brian's fixation on the car knew no bounds. As a devoted Ford enthusiast, he transformed the Crown Victoria police vehicle completely, with neon lights adorning its exterior, complementing its formidable engine prowess. Yet perhaps the piece de resistance was the life-sized zombie mannequin nestled in the back seat. It added an eerie, yet undeniably captivating touch to the vehicle. The car paved the way to a social life. It helped Brian connect with other people. So, while employed as a packer at the Amazon.com warehouse in Phoenix, he put a lot of his limited resources into it. But still, even with a multitude of online admirers, Brian was lonely. What kind of problems was Brian trying to escape when he shot at imaginary zombies? An unemployed father with hoarding tendencies? Or something sinister? He had rented his home from a Mennonite church member. He found comfort in the church once, but soon he abandoned it. Perhaps because he was not a very religious person. He was a regular churchgoer for a while, but soon the members were only picking up his daughter for Sunday service. A senior pastor of the church, Chris King, called him over for dinner, which is something people usually take away when meeting cosplayers. Ryan's social media profile often exhibits pictures or art with mutilated women. Using the profile name The Duck 13, his deviant art page shows he favored paintings where women were nude, tortured, in trouble and physically suffering. People did not know about his dark past. And to understand that, we must go back decades. It was May 1989. 24-year-old Celeste Bentley had just gotten off at the same bus stop as a 16-year-old boy. As she started walking to work, she felt the boy run past her. She felt like he had tried to hit her, a harmless prank. But as she reached behind to touch her back, her hand came back bloody. Ryan stabbed her in the back. Celeste screamed and somehow reached the store where she worked. A colleague called emergency services, and within half an hour, Celeste was in an ambulance. The police had found the teenager and brought him to the ambulance to be ID'd. It was Brian Patrick Miller. Celeste pressed charges. The boy had narrowly missed severing or even stabbing her in her heart. He served time in a juvenile detention center for aggravated assault. He spent 2 years in there. Before that, he just spent his life with his mother in Hawaii. She was a detention officer with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. After his father's recent fatal motorbike accident, he lived with his mother until moving to Phoenix with her. Ellen Miller also found something slightly alarming when Brian was serving time in juvenile detention. As she was going through his belongings, she came across a note titled, "The Plan." The pages outlined a disturbing goal to take a girl, tie her up in the trunk, and remove her clothes and force her against her will. This note described how he intended to find and take a young woman. But Brian's mother found it so troubling that she took it to Phoenix police. It was Brian's 18th birthday in 1991, and he had just been released from custody as an adult. She told the police at the time that she was very worried about her safety and that she would not let him return home. So after his release, Brian went to a Phoenix halfway house. This was only the beginning. A horrible case unfolded on November 8, 1992. Angela Brasso, a tech worker who had recently relocated to Phoenix, was enjoying the pleasant weather by indulging in some exercise. Angela made it a routine to go for her evening bike ride during the golden hour at sunset, which is considered the ideal time for riding in Phoenix. It helped her get out of her desk job and stretch her legs for a bit. She also did her best thinking at this time. As dusk fell, she took the same route she always did. That evening, Angela had started from her apartment around 7 p.m., as recounted by her boyfriend Joe. He remained at home, intending to bake Angela a birthday cake, assuming she would return shortly. She was just hours away from turning 22 years old. It was the eve of her birthday. He wanted to do something special. But as hours passed with no sign of Angela, Joe became increasingly worried as her absence was out of character. He began with frantic searches along the canal paths, reaching out to Angela's friends and even her mother in Pennsylvania. Eventually, he alerted the police about Angela's disappearance. Like many locals, she enjoyed biking along the paths adjacent to Phoenix's distinctive canals. But danger could be lurking nearby, especially near one of the tunnel systems under the interstate. The following morning, searchers made a grim discovery. Right beside the trail she had been riding her bike on, her headless torso was discovered, with fatal stab wounds. Next to her apartment, she had been fatally stabbed in the back, assaulted, and decapitated. Her head was nowhere to be found. Researchers were frantic. They could not make out much. But 10 days later, a man fishing along the canal found something. It was a human head, stuck through a grate. After being decapitated for 10 days, the head was very well preserved. The officers realized this was no accident, assault, or robbery gone wrong. It was a calculated slaying just to get the trophy. It was more disturbing than they had first thought it to be. Due to a lack of decomposition, investigators believe the perpetrator may have stored her severed head in a refrigerator before throwing it in the canal. The purple mountain bike she rode around the city was missing, and never recovered. For nearly a year, nothing else was done. No leads, no witnesses, just the people who found the body parts. Investigators were stumped. 10 months after Angela's passing, when the mother of 17-year-old Melanie Burness returned home from a dinner date, she discovered that her daughter had broken her curfew and had not returned. In a quiet suburb, Angela's mother was found dead. Nestled away from the bustling streets of Phoenix, the mother's heartache unfolded one fateful evening. She had just returned home from a dinner date, ready to pour out the details to her 17-year-old daughter, Melanie Burness, on all the details of her date. As she stepped through the door, she noticed that Melanie's bicycle was also missing from its usual spot. Panic surged as she realized that her daughter was not only late, but also missing. With each passing moment, the mother's worry deepened. Where could Melanie be? Had something happened to her? Questions swirled in her mind. In the stillness of the night, she was worried sick. Rachel Skipmaker, Melanie's best friend, was getting ready for bed at 10:30 p.m. when Melanie's mother called her house. "Is Melanie there?" She was frantic. This was not like Melanie. Sure, she went out and even broke a few rules, but she was never this late. She was always home on time. Rachel shrugged it off as a friend who forgot to call her mom. She was going to be in trouble for sure, but the next morning Melanie was found, in a way. Charlotte Pottle was riding her bike along the canal with her toddler daughter strapped in a bicycle seat. When the bike came out of one of the tunnels, something splashed onto Charlotte. It was a muddy puddle, but for some reason it felt strange, odd. Something was wrong with the puddle, and Charlotte could not exactly say what it was. So she turned her bike around after a while. She looked at it very closely and realized this was not muddy water. It was blood. In the quiet Phoenix neighborhood, this chilling discovery by Charlotte Pottle would shake the community to its core. Charlotte noticed drag marks leading toward a tree and then curving back towards the nearby canal. Prompted by Charlotte's alarming observation, authorities were contacted. Later that same night, local news reports surfaced, revealing the grim find of a woman's headless body in the canal. A haunting echo of Angela Brasso's tragic fate, whose head had been discovered in the vicinity earlier. As the news spread, Rachel Skipmaker was stunned with disbelief. The body was found clothed in a teal bodysuit, an item unfamiliar to her friend Melanie. She told anyone who would listen that Melanie did not have a teal bodysuit. It was not something she would wear. But Rachel's disbelief turned to horror the following day when confirmation arrived. The body was indeed Melanie's. The community mourned the loss of the young woman, and detectives embarked on the pursuit of justice. A friend and roommate of Brian recalls how he was joking about that night, especially since he had a bodysuit similar to the one found on Melanie. Investigators strongly suspected that Melanie had fallen victim to the same perpetrator responsible for Angela's demise. They pieced together evidence suggesting a methodical approach by the assailant, who likely ambushed both women from behind. The investigation uncovered chilling details of Melanie's final moments. The assailant had not only stabbed her, but had also subjected her to this revelation provided a crucial breakthrough. DNA evidence that could potentially lead to the perpetrator's capture. As authorities continued their pursuit, the community remained united in grief and determination. The tragic cases of Angela and Melanie spooked the entire neighborhood. Young women were afraid to go cycling alone alongside the canal. Brian Miller was trying to start over. In 1997, he married Amy Miller. They looked like the sweetest couple, both in glasses, innocent, round faces. They were the kind of people you would want to raise your kids next door to. But behind closed doors, they had some strange fetishes. According to Amy, they were into a bit of masochism. Intimacy to them involved some cutting, some blood. A lot of role-playing foreplay. As disturbing as it sounds, Brian would push needles through Amy's lips, sometimes both the lips, sewing them shut. It was all consensual but a little out of control. He would inflict cuts on her body and taste the blood as well. The couple even had a daughter. But only 7 years later, Amy filed for divorce. It was in 2005 that the couple separated. When the divorce was finalized in 2006, he was granted custody of his daughter. The precise and fatal nature of the initial stab wounds in both Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernays' slayings led detectives to suspect that the perpetrator might have had surgical skills. The fear instilled by the unsolved case lingered in the Phoenix community for years, with parents hesitant to let their children out after dark. Despite collecting matching male DNA from the crime scenes, the Canal Slayer cases went cold for over 2 decades. However, advancements in forensic technology, including DNA analysis and genetic genealogy, breathed new life into the investigation. It was in 2014 when Colleen Fitzpatrick, a forensic genealogist, utilized DNA profiles from the crime scenes to search public genealogy databases for potential matches. She used the Y chromosome in the DNA to fish out a potential match. Her effort yielded 6 matches to the name Miller, prompting detectives to dig deeper. However, Miller is a common last name, so Detective Schwarzkopf searched deeper into his files, where he identified 6 individuals with the surname Miller. When Schwarzkopf read the note Brian's mother submitted to the police, he noticed something. Many things in there were similar to what happened to Angela. Eventually, he focused on Brian Patrick Miller, a 42-year-old with a Phoenix address. Despite being one of over 600 persons of interest, records showed Brian's file was not thoroughly pursued by the police. Further investigation revealed he had a criminal record predating the Canal slayings. Records revealed his Phoenix address and age, but his identity remained elusive, buried among hundreds of other suspects in the case file. So they zeroed in on the 42-year-old single father. Officer Eric Braverman reflected on Brian Patrick Miller's dual identity, contrasting his harmless demeanor with the larger-than-life persona of the zombie hunter. Despite his intimidating alter ego, Brian appeared as an unassuming divorced single dad in his everyday life. He collected pictures with officers in his attire. He was a bit of a celebrity. However, suspicions lingered regarding his potential involvement in the Canal slayings. To confirm or refute these suspicions, investigators came up with a surveillance operation, closely monitoring his activities at his workplace in an Amazon warehouse. Each day, Brian parked his distinctive zombie mobile in the same spot, drawing attention to himself with loud music during breaks. Even at lunchtime, for 15 minutes, he would do the same. Detective Clark Schwarzkopf devised an intricate scheme to get Brian Miller's DNA. Posing as a security consultant, he approached the single father with a job offer. appealing to his interest in earning extra income. Brian, intrigued by the prospect of a well-paying position, agreed to meet Schwarzkopf at a Chili's restaurant to discuss further. During their meeting on January 2, 2015, Schwarzkopf and Miller filled out a job application, providing the perfect opportunity for the cold case unit to collect DNA samples. By bringing along his teenage daughter. As they talked, Brian's gentle demeanor was evident, especially in his interactions with his 15-year-old daughter Sarah, who accompanied him. The scene was set for an important moment in the investigation. As Schwarzkopf and Brian went about the meeting, they engaged in seemingly mundane tasks, unaware of the high stakes involved, and the critical role this encounter would play in unraveling the mystery of the Phoenix Canal Slayer. The entire team was ready. They had watched closely as staff carefully took out the cutlery from the dishwasher and placed it in the booth where Brian came later. He ordered a cheeseburger and ate it fast. The detective kept trying to make him have a drink of a Coke or water, but Brian was hungry. It seemed the sting operation was going to be a bust until Brian finally took a sip of the water. Despite being aware of Brian's troubled past as a juvenile offender, Detective Clark Schwarzkopf could not shake the feeling that he was not the perpetrator they were seeking. Observing Brian Miller interact with his daughter reinforced Schwarzkopf's gut instinct that he did not fit the profile of a cold-blooded assailant from the early 90s. As their encounter came to a close, Schwarzkopf received a brief tour of Brian's zombie hunter vehicle before parting ways, promising to stay in contact. Unbeknownst to Brian, the cold case unit discreetly sent his water glass to the crime lab for analysis. Nearly 2 weeks later, Schwarzkopf and his team received an unexpected call from the lab, sparking a mix of anticipation and disbelief among the detectives. Initially perceived as a joke, their skepticism quickly turned to shock when the lab director confirmed the match between Brian Miller's DNA from the water glass and the genetic material recovered from the crime scenes of Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernis, who struggled to comprehend the implications of the discovery. Within hours, Miller was apprehended. During subsequent police questioning, he adamantly denied any involvement in the slaying, adopting a dismissive and bewildered demeanor. Despite Brian's protesting of innocence, investigators wasted no time obtaining a search warrant for his residence. They were eager to delve into every aspect of his life and possessions in pursuit of further evidence. Recalling the moment vividly, Detective Clark Schwarzkopf described the surreal scene as he approached Brian Miller's residence. They were met with skepticism from onlookers who doubted their ability to penetrate the cluttered home. The house resembled a set from the television series Hoarders, with every available space crammed with trash. Trash left only narrow passages leading to essential areas like the bathroom and kitchen. Surveying the chaotic environment, Schwarzkopf could not help but feel overwhelmed. He recognized the monumental task ahead as his team prepared to meticulously comb through the clutter in search of potential evidence. Amidst the clutter, Schwarzkopf focused on a new lead mentioned by Miller during his interrogation, his ex-wife Amy. Miller had singled out Amy as the one person he harbored genuine animosity towards, hinting at a troubled history between them. Delving into Amy's account, Schwarzkopf uncovered startling revelations about Miller's past. She was just 19 when she met Brian Miller in 1996. The two were married within a year and they moved to Everett, Washington. Amy had a shocking revelation for the detective. She disclosed to the detective that Miller had confessed to a chilling act of violence. The demise of a young girl who had approached his door years before, an incident that had remained concealed until now. With Miller's unsettling past laid bare, Schwarzkopf pressed on with his investigation. He was determined to bring closure to the long-standing mystery surrounding the Canal Slayer. Despite the complexities and emotional toll of the case, Schwarzkopf remained steadfast in his pursuit of justice. He was propelled by a relentless commitment to uncovering the truth. Amy told the investigators something vital. Brian had told her about the fatal stabbing of a mentally challenged Girl Scout who came knocking at his door. According to Brian, this was right after he was released from juvenile detention. He was living in an apartment operated by a Mennonite church outreach program north of Central Phoenix. According to the story he told, when the little girl knocked at the door, Brian pulled her, not even giving her a chance to scream, slitting open her throat. Details got more grim when he allegedly wanted to preserve her head in cold water. As he placed it in the tub, he accidentally ran hot water, so his plans were ruined. He simply dismembered her and threw her in the garbage. Yes, a whole person stuffed into garbage bags. He left the bags in the trash can till garbage day. But the awful stench that neighbors complained to him of, he justified by saying, it was meat gone bad. The story did resemble an account from May 26, 1992. In the heart of North Phoenix, 13-year-old Brandy Myers was out and about. Armed with determination and a stack of pledge sheets, she set out to canvass her neighborhood. She went from door to door, collecting money for the school's bookathon. She was 13, but mentally closer to a 9-year-old. Brandy was last seen by witnesses less than 70 feet from Brian's apartment. Mennonites recalled the terrible smell that rose from his apartment. It was worse than rotting meat. So bad, they had to get the house cleaned while Brian was away. But the cleaners did not peek inside the trash. They just cleaned everything. So Amy and Brian had been blissfully married. What happened to cause the change? It all happened in 2002. A woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez was walking down the street in Everett at night. A man pulled over, offering her a ride. She had seen the man talking to a friend of hers, so she felt he was okay. She told him she had to make a call. Cell phones were not common, so the man took her to his workplace so she could use the phone. As she was on the phone, suddenly the man leaped at her with a 12-inch serrated kitchen knife and stabbed her in the back. The girl struggled and eventually escaped. When police showed up, the man claimed self-defense and police did not know who to believe. The man was Brian Miller, and he was arrested and charged with first-degree assault with a fatal weapon. He was in jail from May 2002 until his December trial. He was acquitted, but Amy noticed a terrible change in her husband. She said it began with the letters she had received from her jailed husband while he awaited trial. They began with his claims of innocence and then intimate deviance. He would involve needles, knives, and pain into the bed once he was out of jail. It was unbelievably dark. Trial of Brian Patrick Miller, known as the Zombie Hunter, unfolded with startling revelations about his past and a unique defense strategy. Brian was accused of the 1992 slayings of Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernis. They are not charging him with the slaying of Brandy Myers, because they need more evidence. His defense attorneys admitted he was the canal slayer, but argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. She claimed that his mother's abuse during his childhood had led to his violent behavior. They argued that Miller suffered from dissociative amnesia, preventing him from remembering the however. Prosecutors countered by presenting evidence of Miller's violent past, including a previous stabbing incident. During the trial, Brian's ex-wife testified about his increasingly violent behavior, including incidents of intimate deviance and abuse. The trial concluded in June 2023, with the judge finding Brian guilty in both cases. Despite acknowledging the abuse he suffered as a child, the judge sentenced him to life in prison. In 2023, a 48 Hours producer contacted him by email. Miller says he is not guilty. He disagrees with psychological experts called by his defense lawyers, who said he had dissociative amnesia and could not remember anything about the slayings. Not seeing his daughter, says Miller, is his biggest regret about being imprisoned. He wrote, "What I miss most is spending time with my daughter and friends." Two teens are slayed in the 60s and 70s. Their perpetrator seems to have gotten away with it until almost 60 years later, when detectives connect them through DNA and name the faceless monster that took their lives. 19-year-old Diane Olkwitz in 1966 and 15-year-old Terry Lee Erdman in 1971 were taken mercilessly from their parents. The two teens lost their lives 5 years apart, taking 2 miles from each other. But decades later, police would dig up the truth, literally, exhuming their assailant to gather DNA. The fourth child of a Catholic family with 6 children, Diane Olkwitz, was born in 1947 in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, block from St. Mary Catholic Church where they were parishioners. Diane's elder siblings Dennis, Edward, and Nancy adored her. The younger ones, Patty and Debbie, equally loved their big sister. Diane was the quintessential middle child, loving and caring, doting. She was sensitive, but an extrovert, and loved to be out and about. Diane was a tall, slender brunette with a quick and a bright smile. By the time she finished high school, she had blossomed into a young woman of grace and charm. Regular visits to St. Mary's Church were a part of Diane's routine, a sanctuary where she sought solace and guidance. Whenever she faced challenges or uncertainties, she would turn to prayer, finding comfort in her faith. In matters of the heart, Diane approached relationships with sincerity. While she dated casually during high school and even had a few steady boyfriends, it was not until after graduation that she found a deeper connection. Meeting Donald Erlmeyer from Milwaukee sparked a romance that would eventually lead to engagement. As she ventured into adulthood, Diane also chose a path typical for ambitious young girls at the time. Securing a secretarial position at Kenworth Manufacturing, she had a diligent work ethic. After a year of employment, Diane felt ready to take the next step in her journey. It was time to fly the coop, so to speak. With her brother Edward's girlfriend as her roommate, Diane moved into her own apartment on Hoyt Drive. Diane stood by her dear friend, Diane Zimmer, as she chose another path and got married. Zimmer and Diane had been in the same school since elementary school, but became best friends in freshman year. Serving as maid of honor at Zimmer's wedding, who married her longtime high school sweetheart, marked yet another chapter in their shared history. Her fiancé, Donald Erlmeyer, attended as her plus one. Shortly after, Donald left for basic training at Fort Hood, Texas, as he had been drafted into the Army. Diane felt a deep sense of loneliness without him by her side. To fill the void left by his absence, she sought out activities to occupy her time and distract her from the ache in her heart. In the evenings, Diane enrolled in swimming and knitting classes, embracing the opportunity to learn new skills and engage in social interactions. Additionally, she took on a part-time job as a hostess at the local Dutchland dairy restaurant, eagerly immersing herself in the bustling atmosphere to pass the hours. On November 3, 1966, Diane went about her day as usual, in hopes of borrowing a blue mohair sweater for a sleepover planned that night. Without hesitation, Diane generously agreed, promising to leave the sweater outside her apartment door for Patty to collect. Diane worked at 13700 block of West Silver Spring Drive at the metal stamping plant of Kenworth Manufacturing Company. By now, she had worked at the company for a year and a half, marking 18 months with them. She was dedicated. That day, the building was busy with activity as 25 factory workers carried out their weekend shifts, which concluded promptly at 3:30 p.m. amidst the industrious setting. Diane stood out as the sole secretary. She was responsible for managing communications and coordinating deliveries. After the factory workers left for the day, Diane remained behind, working away at her desk until 4:30 p.m. Her duties extended beyond the typical work hours as she dutifully fielded phone calls and accepted late deliveries. Following her shift, Diane would typically rendezvous with her best friend Zimmer at her nearby workplace. Together they would head home, sharing laughter and companionship along the way. However, that day something was definitely off. Diane was unusually late in picking up Zimmer, worrying for those who knew her well. In response, Zimmer accepted a ride with her employer's wife, who offered to take her to Kenworth to investigate. Upon arriving at the factory, they were confused. Diane's car sat in the parking lot, seemingly undisturbed. Peering through the window into the plant, they spotted Diane's purse resting on a desk and her coat hanging near the closet. Yet Diane herself was nowhere to be found. To add to the mystery, all the doors were securely locked, leaving no clues as to Diane's whereabouts. Maybe she was in the bathroom. Dennis, her brother, worked in the plant next door, so Zimmer and the boss's wife walked over to him. The trio returned just in time for the supervisor to show up for some after-hour tasks. He came to unlock the shipping room around 5:20 p.m., and that is when they saw all the blood. 20 feet from the door was the lifeless body of Diane, face down on the floor in her own blood. She had been stabbed so many times. Her knit dress was pulled up between her legs, slightly hanging off her shoulders, but her underwear was untouched. So initially, the officers believed she had not been assaulted. There was no appearance of aggression or violence near her private parts. But the medical examiner reported it was not so. An autopsy revealed that she had been stabbed 106 times with a knife that likely had a 3-inch blade with one sharp, serrated edge. Her wounds measured were between 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch wide and from 2 to 3 inches deep. Initially, she had put up a fight and tried to block the painful attack, as there were defensive wounds on her arms and the back of her hands. The attacker had bashed her nose, breaking it. There were 30 stab wounds on her head, neck and face, and 35 stabbings in rows down the sides of her back, where she had been stabbed repeatedly while on her stomach. Diane's tragedy sent shockwaves through the once peaceful village of Menominee Falls, leaving its residents full of disbelief. In all of the village's history, such a violent act was unmatched. It was the first recorded slaying in the serene community at the northwestern city limits of Milwaukee. Just months prior to Diane's untimely tragedy, the slaying of a 10-year-old girl in Milwaukee had cast a shadow of fear over the region. Debbie, her younger sister, was scared because the girl was so close to Debbie in age. But Diane, with a reassuring smile, had said, "We live in Menominee Falls." In the aftermath of Diane's attack, the town changed forever. Fear gripped the hearts of residents. They bought guard dogs, chain locks, and firearms as they struggled with the new feeling of vulnerability in their once safe town. At Diane's funeral mass held at St. Mary's, grief hung heavy in the air as 250 mourners, including her devastated fiancé Donald Hurlmeyer, gathered to bid farewell. Donald, granted emergency leave from basic training, was still reeling from the shock of the tragic loss. In an attempt to catch the perpetrator as soon as possible, Diane's friends, family, and acquaintances were questioned on the night her body was recovered. Patrolman Dan Schramm's first year as a police officer started off with something huge. He was assigned to remain at the side of the crime to overlook comings and goings. As spooked as he was, there was nothing to fear. Nobody came to look at things again. He would retire as a captain 26 years later, but nothing could match the horrors of the Diane to give a better picture of the events leading to her tragic demise. Police surmised that the assailant ambushed Diane as she prepared to lock up and leave for the day, catching her off guard when she was all alone after hours. Their suspicions deepened as they contemplated the intruder's familiarity with the layout of the plant. It suggested that there was planning involved in targeting Diane. The then chief of the Menominee Falls Police Department, Charles Kuhn, offered a sobering deduction, saying that Diane's assailant was not a faceless stranger, but rather someone she knew. This unsettling revelation cast a shadow of suspicion over friends, acquaintances, and associates, heightening the sense of unease within the tight-knit community. A team of dedicated detectives committed themselves to working day and night. The 7 detectives worked tirelessly through grueling 12 to 16-hour shifts without rest. Over 100 crucial pieces of evidence, including fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene and Diane's blood-stained garments, were meticulously cataloged and dispatched to the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. In the ensuing weeks, law enforcement officers interrogated all possible leads. They conducted over 500 interviews in search of the truth. Despite their exhaustive efforts, their pursuit was fruitless. Initially, 6 people were marked as potential suspects, each with solid alibis firmly in place. Diane's family and close confidants steered investigators towards a troubling figure lurking at her workplace. The son of her boss, whose persistent advances had made her incredibly uncomfortable, she was almost afraid of him. Recounting Diane's hesitance, her sister Patty vividly recalled her distressing encounters with the unwanted suitor. He knew she was committed, but that did not stop him. Yet even as suspicions swirled around the employer's son, he had a steadfast alibi, corroborated by family members. As the trail of leads grew cold and the promise of breakthroughs faded, the investigation lost its momentum. With each passing day, Diane's unsolved case went cold. Donald Hurlmeyer, her fiancé, returned to basic training heartbroken, with questions that would never be answered. Diane's parents both passed young, their health deteriorating under the strain of their daughter's slaying. Her mother Irene had been diagnosed with diabetes shortly before the terrible night she lost her daughter. She passed away of congestive heart failure at 50 years old in 1973. One would say she could not bear losing her daughter. Her father Robert suffered a heart attack at 55, 3 years later. Diane's eldest sister, Nancy, passed at 58, and her brother Dennis, who tirelessly pursued justice for Diane, suffered a stroke at 50, and he too was lost 12 years later. In 1966, Menominee Falls Police sent a questionnaire to delivery companies that had contacts with Kenworth. Company records show that your company makes deliveries here, and we request your cooperation in answering the following questions and returning this paper to our department immediately. Your cooperation will be of vital assistance in solving this crime. One company responded, saying the man picked something up from Kenworth 4 days before the tragedy. The man would have been familiar with the scene of the Diane Olkwitz case. It is unclear whether this lead was pursued. In the 1990s, DNA technology raised hopes for solving Diane's case. Despite entering evidence into Cody's and pursuing suspects for DNA samples, no matches were found. The prime suspect, the employer's son, had passed away in 1991, and his cremated remains could not provide a sample. Initially, detectives believed this was a position that offers no hope of progress. While the case remained open, it was simply a formality. But they did not realize the assailant was lurking nearby, looking for new prey. Terry Lee Erdman was described as a quiet, reserved girl with a great sense of humor. The middle child of 3 siblings, she had 2 brothers, Daryl and Daniel. But being the only daughter in the family, she got extra attention from her parents. Terry's father worked as a switchman for the Milwaukee Road. Their life was comfortable. Her mother, Lois May Christian, was employed in fabric stores and J.C. Penney's. She often went bowling with her husband in couples leagues. The family loved spending time together at their cottage in Tomahawk, Wisconsin. Terry had a loving family. The 15-year-old had just finished 9th grade at Samuel Morris Junior High School. She was going to enroll in James Madison High School during fall in September of 1971. On Wednesday, June 23, 1971, she left home somewhere around 5 p.m. She was going to babysit in the neighborhood. She normally left a note when she left, and it was usually on a Wednesday, but she did not do it this time. Our family just assumed it slipped her mind. But by 9:30 p.m., they were worried. They asked the neighbors and called around. She had spent the afternoon with friends near North 95th and West Rio Streets, laughing and chatting until the sky turned a shade of purple, opting for the well-trodden path that cut through the open field. It was a shortcut she knew well that shaved minutes off her walk to their home on the 10400 block of West Silver Spring Drive. That was the last anyone knew of her. The next day, 11-year-old Robert Sonier was walking in the woods with his father, Walter. The woods were right behind a Morway department store in the 101 to 100 block of West Appleton Avenue. This particular area of woods was called Lover's Lane, as it was secluded and teen couples often parked their cars there to get intimate, as suggested by the name. As they walked through the dense bushes, Robert saw something odd. It looked like a person lying on the ground, in the thicket of trees and small grass. He first thought, perhaps it was a couple, but then noticed it was a girl all alone. He realized it was a lifeless body of a girl. The 15-year-old was stabbed over 60 times. Her arms were tied with twine. Her blue shorts and underwear had been pulled down, and her jersey sweater was pulled over her face, suggesting she had been assaulted. She had been stabbed aggressively. Late that night, around 12:30 a.m., her father was brought in to identify her body at the county morgue. Terry's 1971 case is the 3rd oldest unsolved case at the Milwaukee Police Department. Police exhausted all possible leads and nothing could be said about whether or not she would get justice. Her family was never the same again. In 2011, DNA was taken from Terry's autopsy, and it was identified as male DNA. Detectives suspected the same person committed both of the slayings of Diane and Terry due to case similarities. Firstly, the distance between the cases. It happened around 1.5 miles from each other. Also, both victims were teenage girls. So it did match the profile he must have set in his mind for the ideal victim. Both of them were stabbed. It was highly aggressive, as if in a frenzy, even as the life had drained from the body. Lastly, there was evidence of intimate assault, which provided a motive for such a heinous crime. A joint request was placed at the Wisconsin Crime Lab to compare the DNA profiles to each other. The Wisconsin Crime Lab then confirmed that the DNA profiles from both victims were consistent. The DNA could not be matched to a suspect, so the case went cold again. In October of 2021, Menominee Falls Detective Chris Bellows met with the staff of the State of Wisconsin Crime Laboratory about the use of forensic investigative genetic genealogy, which had been developed in 2019. Then, in February of 2023, through investigative efforts that utilized forensic investigative genetic genealogy, a potential suspect was identified. Clarence Tappendorf was a delivery driver in 1966 for Claremont Transfer Company, whose route included Kenworth. There were no deliveries scheduled on the date of Diane's demise. 4 days before her slaying, he picked up a delivery according to the questionnaires Menominee Falls PD had given out during the initial investigation. He would have basic knowledge of the layout of the building and the fact that Diane would be alone 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. On the day Diane lost her life, Tappendorf made a delivery to a location across the street from Kenworth Company. A man whose life spanned 80 years had already passed away on January 6, 2008. Investigators reached out to the late Tappendorf's 2 adult sons, and one of them agreed to provide a DNA sample. They compared his DNA to the profiles from both cases and discovered that the DNA found on Diane Olkwitz's clothing likely belonged to Tappendorf, their father. Police then obtained a search warrant to exhume Tappendorf's body from Holy Cross Cemetery in Milwaukee to collect DNA samples for further analysis. Tappendorf was a devoted husband to Joyce for 57 years, a loving father to his 6 children, 6 grandchildren, and great-grandfather of many. As wonderful as he sounds, this family man was a positive match for the perpetrator's DNA as announced in October 2023. He would have been 39 years old when he took Diane's life and 44 when he attacked little Terry Lee. But it makes one wonder, especially considering what happened to him later. At the age of 17 years, his daughter's life was taken from her. A young man was charged with battery and abuse, causing her demise. Hattie Jo Tappendorf was found beaten lifeless on a sidewalk on August 1, 1975, just 2 blocks from her home. This was in 1975, 4 years after Tappendorf's last reported attack. The perpetrator was identified as Roy Clark O'Neill, 18 years old. His parents turned him over to the police after viewing a television report that showed a watch found at the scene of the slaying. The suspect told authorities that he had taken LSD and had been drinking. He was convicted of second-degree slaying and sentenced to 38 years in prison. Then Tappendorf's son passed away in 1987. His wife, Joyce, had to face the unbearable pain of losing a child to a violent fate all over again. On Friday, May 22, 1987, their 34-year-old son, Mark, took his own life in what police determined to be a slaying. Mark shot his wife, Linda, 34, in the head with a hunting rifle before turning the weapon on himself early Friday morning in their Southside home. The bodies were discovered by their 15-year-old daughter around 7 a.m. The couple's daughter and son had slept through the ordeal. Joyce reflected on the tragedy, struggling to comprehend why such sorrow had struck her family again. She described her son as a deeply troubled person, unable to understand why he had also taken Linda's life. But this could offer another explanation. Perhaps there was an undiagnosed illness, a mental illness, for both the father and the son. Debbie Cagliari, Diane's sister, thanked the detectives for their hard work and dedication to solve Diane's case. Debbie was only 9 when Diane had passed. It took 57 years to bring the family closure, but they were finally able to bury the whole thing and leave it behind. Her niece even appeared for an interview. She said the following to families of other cold case victims: "Do not give up. Do not give up. You cannot give up hope. You have to keep it going." Norman Gross, a former classmate of Diane's, said he never gave up hope that her perpetrator would eventually be revealed. "Just going to class reunions and stuff, her name was always there. She is always on your mind. All these years and finally it has come to a conclusion." Attorney General Josh Call said, "It saddens me that the person responsible was not able to be brought to justice while he was alive. But I'm glad that we were able to bring closure to this case through the relentless academic investigators and scientists to ensure that the person responsible was identified. Chief Jeffrey Norman said, "I know there are families out there wondering about their case. There is no statute of limitations regarding a slaying investigation. We are working on it, whether it is 5 years, 10 years, 70 years, to bring closure, to bring the resolution to these most heinous crimes." Despite the tragic losses and the years of anguish, the truth was uncovered, allowing the families to finally begin to heal. While some would say Tappendorf got away with it, it is almost bizarre how he suffered in his life. At least through DNA genetic genealogy, the families of the victims had some answers as to who would do something so gruesome. As to why, well, that answer lies buried with Clarence Tappendorf. Investigators say they are looking into the possibility that Tappendorf could be responsible for more crimes. For nearly 3 decades, the brutal slaying of young Geelong, Australia mother Annette Stewart lay shrouded in mystery. Her lifeless body was discovered in her bedroom in 1992, a cold case that seemed destined to remain unsolved, until an unexpected twist in the investigation of another more recent slaying brought new hope. In the early 1990s, Annette Stewart, a vibrant 29-year-old mother of 2, was a beloved member of the Geelong West community. Annette worked at the Winchester factory in Point Henry, where she was known for her cheerful demeanor and hardworking nature. She had a wide circle of friends and was deeply involved in the social life of Geelong West. Annette was described by her friends and family as full of life, always smiling, and willing to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. Her home on Hope Street was a hub of activity, often filled with laughter and the comforting aroma of tea as she entertained friends and neighbors. As a single mother, Annette was dedicated to providing a loving and stable home for her children, 13-year-old Jacinta and 10-year-old Aaron. She balanced her responsibilities with grace, making sure her children felt supported and loved, despite the challenges of raising them on her own. On March 16, 1992, Annette started her day early, heading to her job at the Winchester factory in Point Henry. After finishing her shift around 4:30 p.m., Annette made a few stops in Geelong to run some errands and make some purchases. These routine activities were part of her everyday life and gave no inclination of the horrors that were to come. By early evening, Annette returned to her home on Hope Street. That evening, she invited 4 friends over for tea and to help her fix her television. After they left, Annette prepared for a quiet night at home. But 2 days later, a friend, David Grant, noticed her car was still parked in the driveway, an unusual sight that raised immediate concern. This friend decided to check on Annette, entering the house, only to be met with a horrifying scene. Inside, he discovered Annette's naked body in her bedroom. The home, once a haven of safety and joy, had become the site of a horrific crime. An autopsy would later reveal that Annette had been brutally strangled, a cruel and senseless that cut her vibrant life short just weeks before her 30th birthday. In the days following the discovery of her body, Geelong West was gripped by shock and grief. The brutal nature of her demise sent ripples through the community, and Victoria Police quickly launched an extensive investigation. Detectives meticulously combed through Annette's home, searching for any clues that might lead to the perpetrator. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and anyone who had been in contact with Annette in the days leading up to her tragic end. The fact that there were no signs of forced entry suggested that Annette might have known her attacker. This was a theory that guided the initial phase of the investigation. Police collected various pieces of evidence from the crime scene, including hair fibers and other forensic materials. One of the primary suspects was a co-worker of Annette's from the Winchester factory. This individual had been named by a coroner as a prime suspect in 2007, but despite being questioned, no charges were brought against him. This suspect, along with several others, were scrutinized thoroughly, but each lead seemed to fizzle out without yielding any concrete results. Community was cooperative, and Annette's friends and family were desperate for answers. But despite the best efforts of the detectives, the investigation began to stall. The absence of modern forensic technology and the lack of substantial evidence made it increasingly difficult to pinpoint the person responsible for the heinous crime. As the months turned into years, Annette's case gradually went cold. By the mid-2000s, It had joined the ranks of many other unsolved cases in Victoria Police's cold case files. Although the original investigators had exhausted all known avenues, Annette's family and friends never gave up hope for justice. In 2015, police offered a $1 million reward for information leading to a resolution in Annette's case. This reward, it brought in a flurry of tips and renewed public interest, but ultimately failed to produce any actionable evidence. The case remained open but inactive, with detectives waiting on any new information that might break the case open. Then, after nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions, the breakthrough in Annette Stewart's case came from an unexpected source. It began with a phone call that reignited hope and set in motion a series of events that would lead to the end of one of Victoria's most perplexing cold cases. In 2019, Victoria Police received a tip-off that would prove to be pivotal. The caller claimed that the person responsible for taking the life of Annette Stewart at her home in 1992 was 56-year-old Darren Chalmers. The caller revealed to the police that Chalmers' brother, Jamie, had once confided in him that Darren Chalmers confessed. Chalmers was working as a gardener with a history of substance abuse, living in Perth, Western Australia. Chalmers was no stranger to the initial investigators of Annette's case. He had admitted to being inside her home on the day she was fatally attacked, but there was insufficient evidence to charge him at the time. Air fibers collected from the crime scene and retested by cold case detectives yielded a faint DNA match to Chalmers. While this evidence was not strong enough to be used as definitive evidence in court, it confirmed his presence at the scene and renewed the investigators' determination. Victoria Police collaborated with law enforcement in Western Australia to devise a plan to bring Chalmers to justice. Undercover operatives spent months ingratiating themselves with Chalmers, slowly gaining his trust. Their efforts paid off in January 2020, when Chalmers, believing he was among friends, finally confessed to violently ending Annette Stewart's life. He said that he was one of the people invited to drink tea at her house, as he was friends with the man Annette dated at the time. He left after 45 minutes, but came back hours later saying he had no one to celebrate his birthday with and asking to come in. His birthday was a day earlier. Annette agreed, and they drank a bit before she said he could spend the night on her couch. An hour later, he rose, took the life of Annette by bashing her head 3 times with an iron before strangling her with a cord. He then left by the back door. During the same period, he also admitted to another eerily similar crime, the slaying of Diane Barrett, who had been missing since May 2019. Diane Barrett, a 60-year-old retired music teacher, was known for her kind spirit and love towards others. Living in Medina, a suburb of Perth, she often extended her generosity to her neighbors. Chalmers, who lived just 2 doors down on Ridley Way, was one such neighbor who had benefited from her compassion. On the evening of May 12, 2019, Diane invited Chalmers to her home for a meal. After dinner, she accompanied him to his house for a cup of tea. The friendly visit took a dark turn when Chalmers, without any provocation, launched a brutal attack. He jumped on Diane and used an iron bar across her neck, pressing down with both knees to choke her. The attack lasted for 3 excruciating minutes. After Diane's senseless demise, Chalmers showed no remorse or respect for her remains and dumped her body in a remote bushland southeast of Perth. To cover his tracks, Chalmers meticulously cleaned his home, wiping away any evidence of the crime. Diane's disappearance was reported by concerned neighbors when they noticed her dog locked inside her house without food or water, her lights and television still on. This was completely out of character for Diane, who was last seen alive at a local Bunnings store buying flowers for her elderly mother. Her sudden disappearance and the subsequent discovery of her dog heightened fears for her safety. The investigation into Diane's case intensified over the following months. In January 2020, during the undercover operation targeting Chalmers, he led police to the location of Diane's remains. Because of the advanced state of decomposition, she had to be identified through dental records. The cause that ended her life could not be determined by forensic pathologists, but Chalmers' confession provided the necessary details to piece together the tragic events of that night. In January 2021, Darren Chalmers pleaded guilty to his involvement in the Diane Barrett case. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. He must be in prison for at least 20 years before being eligible for parole. During court proceedings, more light was shed on Chalmers' troubled past, which allegedly played a significant role in shaping his violent tendencies. Born and raised in Victoria, Chalmers was made a ward of the state during his teenage years. It was during this vulnerable period that he suffered assault and abuse at the hands of both men and women. These traumatic experiences left him with deep-seated feelings of anger and rage, particularly towards women. This background of abuse and emotional turmoil had seemed to manifest in violent behavior throughout his life. Justice Stephen Hall, who presided over the case, described the slaying of Diane Barrett as an unprovoked episode of extreme violence. He acknowledged that while Chalmers' substance abuse and troubled past might provide some context for his actions, it did not serve as an excuse. On November 29, 2023, Chalmers returned before the Supreme Court for a pre-sentence hearing on the Annette Stewart case. The court was told Chalmers had written a one-page letter to the court, the full details of which were not aired. Chalmers asked never to be released. No parole for 40 years, not 20, not 30, please 40 years plus, I think I deserve it. Victorian Director of Public Prosecutions, Carrie Judd KC said Chalmers told the court he took the two women's lives believing he would secure a significant financial benefit for himself. Chalmers was handed another life sentence for taking the life of Annette Stewart. He was ordered to serve a single non-parole period of 36 years for both slayings. He will be in his 90s before he is eligible for parole, ensuring that he remains behind bars for the majority, if not the entirety of his life. Are forever linked by their perpetrator, Darren Chalmers. The dedicated efforts of cold case detectives using undercover operations were key in solving these crimes. This allows the families of Annette Stewart and Diane Barrett to find solace in the justice served. Annette's two children, Jacinta Martin and Aaron Stewart, told the court their lives were ripped apart when their mother's life was taken. We were left to feel like a burden on our families. Outside the court, Jillian Stewart, the sister of Annette, expressed relief over the sentencing. It is nearly 32 years we have been waiting for this result. Knowing he can never do this to anyone else, this is wonderful. On an April night in 1981 in Texarkana, Arkansas, the lives of two innocent children, Karen and Gordon Alexander, were brutally cut short behind the walls of their Carmichael Hill home. Stabbed repeatedly with a butter knife, the heinous crime remained a mystery that haunted the community for over 40 years. Then, just as all hope seemed lost, forensic evidence would bring the truth to the surface, a truth that would lead investigators to someone they trusted the most. In Texarkana, Arkansas, Karen and Gordon Alexander grew up in the warmth of a close-knit community during the 1970s. Their home on Carmichael Hill was seemingly filled with laughter and the love provided by their parents, Weldon and Vera Alexander, Cooper Tire and Rubber. Their mother nurtured them with care and affection. Karen Alexander was a reserved 8th grader at College Hill Elementary. She was known for her reserved demeanor and the tendency to only speak when spoken to. With aspirations of becoming a nurse one day, Karen's gentle and caring disposition were evident to those that knew her. But her quiet and shy nature also concealed dark secrets. In contrast to his sister's reserved personality, Gordon Alexander had vibrant energy and zest for life that endeared him to those around him. Despite facing more challenges in his 13 years than many people encounter in a lifetime, Gordon managed to keep his spirits high. Born with a congenital heart defect and enduring open-heart surgery as an infant, Gordon's short life had been marked by setbacks. This included a stroke that left him with limited mobility in his left arm and leg. Undeterred by his physical limitations, Gordon approached life with unwavering optimism and courage. Sadly, fate would deal Gordon another blow when a fall resulted in a broken hip, relegating him to a wheelchair during his recovery. By outward appearances, it seemed that the two siblings had an idyllic life with devoted parents. Unfortunately, behind closed doors, the family dynamic was much more sinister than anyone could have imagined. On April 8, 1981, a quiet morning in Texarkana, Arkansas turned into a scene of horror that would haunt the community for decades. Weldon Alexander, the father of 14-year-old Karen and 13-year-old Gordon, returned home from his overnight shift at Cooper Tire and Rubber shortly after 7 a.m. When he arrived, he noticed something unusual. The screen door and the wooden front door were both open. Stepping inside, he was met with a gruesome sight. In the kitchen, Weldon found his son Gordon lifeless on the floor. In a panic, Weldon moved through the house and discovered his daughter Karen on her bed near the living room area. She was still alive but seriously injured, suffering from multiple stab wounds. Weldon immediately called the police, who arrived to confirm the horrific scene. Barely clinging on to life, she was quickly transported to St. Michael Hospital, where she would tragically pass away 3 days later on April 11th, having never regained consciousness from a coma. An autopsy revealed that Karen had been assaulted in the hours leading up to her demise. Detectives noted that the weapon, a butter knife, had been left at the scene. Weldon admitted to officers that he had removed the knife from Karen's body and placed it on a nearby bookshelf, which accounted for his fingerprints on the weapon. In the immediate aftermath of the brutal slayings of Karen and Gordon Alexander, the Texarkana Police Department launched an intensive investigation. Officers combed through the Alexander home, meticulously documenting the crime scene and gathering evidence. The lack of forced entry suggested that the perpetrator was someone known to the family. Interviews with neighbors, friends, and family members were conducted, but the trail quickly grew cold. Their father reported that their mother, Vera, had been in a psychiatric ward at the time of the tragedy. With no clear suspects and little physical evidence to go on, the investigation stalled and the case went cold. In 1983, a glimmer of hope appeared when Henry Lee Lucas, a violent convicted felon awaiting trial in Texas, began confessing to numerous unsolved crimes across the United States. Lucas manipulated law enforcement by providing detailed accounts of various slayings, gaining perks such as road trips and restaurant meals in return. He would claim responsibility for the Alexander children's case, saying that he had entered their home and attacked them as they slept. His confession initially seemed credible, as he had drifted through Texarkana around the time of the tragedy. But further investigation revealed that Lucas had been working in Florida at the time of the slayings, debunking his confession. Forensic evidence would later confirm that Lucas's DNA did not match the samples found at the scene, forcing detectives back to square one. The Alexander family was devastated by the loss of Karen and Gordon. A month after the tragedy, Weldon and Vera Alexander moved out of their home and relocated across town. In 1984, Vera Alexander, overwhelmed by grief, took her own life at the age of 37. Weldon Alexander would eventually remarry and have 2 more children. Decades later, the cold case was reopened in February 2023 by retired Captain Calvin Seward, who had a personal and professional connection to the original investigation. The decision came after the Facebook page, Justice for Karen and Gordon Alexander, gained popularity. Driven by advancements in DNA technology and a determination to find justice for the Alexander children, Seward, along with forensic criminologist Dr. Todd Steffi and DNA scientist Kelly Dixon, revisited the evidence. DNA extracted from the victim's fingernail tissue revealed a familial match implicating their own father, Weldon Alexander. Further investigation showed that fibers and materials from the crime scene matched those used at Weldon's workplace. Based on the new evidence, investigators developed a theory of what they believe happened on the night of April 7, 1981. According to their reconstruction of events, Weldon Alexander had been assaulting his daughter Karen for at least 6 months before the crime. On that tragic night, he attempted to do it once again. Karen's brother Gordon likely stumbled upon the assault and attempted to intervene. In a fit of rage or perhaps desperation to silence his son, Weldon attacked Gordon first, using a butter knife to do so. Weldon then turned his attention to his daughter, who had managed to reach the living room. There he unleashed another violent attack. Weldon Alexander lived out his remaining years quietly, passing away in 2014 from complications related to Alzheimer's disease at the age of 80. He lived a long life, and his passing was peaceful, 2 luxuries that he ruthlessly stole from his own children. It took 42 years, but the breakthrough in 2022, driven by the dedication of retired Captain Calvin Seward and his team, finally brought the truth to light. Although Weldon never faced justice for his heinous acts, The resolution of the case provided long-awaited answers and a sense of closure for the community and surviving family members. In Jerome, Idaho, the unsolved slaying of 84-year-old Wilma Moy cast a long shadow over the community for nearly 3 decades. Despite suspicions and investigations, the case remained cold until modern DNA technology revealed the identity of her perpetrator. Now the quiet town is rocked once more, as the truth behind Wilma's brutal demise finally comes to light. 84-year-old Wilma Moy lived a quiet life in her modest home in Jerome, Idaho. Like many residents in small towns, she likely knew her neighbors by name, exchanged pleasantries with passerby, and found comfort in the familiar routines of daily life. But the tranquility of Jerome was shattered. On the night of August 10, 1995, when Wilma's peaceful life was brutally disrupted and cut short. On that evening, Jerome police officers responded to a distressing call at Wilma's residence on West Avenue I, only to discover a scene of unimaginable horror. Wilma lay lifeless within her own home, the victim of a vicious attack that left her strangled and subjected to the brutality of an axe. The community was shaken to its core as news of the heinous crime spread like wildfire, leaving residents reeling with shock and disbelief that something so terrible could happen to an innocent elderly woman who never harmed anyone. But one figure stood out from the rest: 34-year-old Danny Lee Kennison. Kennison was a neighbor with a troubled past and a penchant for erratic behavior. Suspicions swirled around him, with many believing that he must have been involved in some way. Kennison's actions in the aftermath of Wilma's brutal slaying painted a portrait of guilt in the eyes of investigators. Kennison's efforts to eliminate evidence moving from his residence, altering his appearance with a fresh haircut and shaven beard, cast an even larger shadow of doubt over his innocence. Investigators believed Kennison to be the prime suspect in the case and even sought out an arrest warrant. Unfortunately, the prosecutor felt that the evidence was too insufficient at the time and the case ground to a halt. With the investigation nearing a standstill, there was a looming fear that Wilma's case would remain unsolved, leaving her loved ones and the Jerome community in a state of lingering uncertainty. Former Jerome County Sheriff and Detective Chatteron first delved into the case in 1999, remaining on it until 2001. His frustrations grew as the absence of critical evidence, such as fingerprints or a suspect's blood sample, hindered progress, leaving the case in a frustrating state of limbo. In 1998, there was a small glimmer of hope in the case when Kennison's wife pointed fingers at him, alleging he confessed to Wilma's slaying. Her testimony was later retracted, casting doubt on its reliability. Even with Kennison's questionable past and shaky alibi, the investigation hit another end. For investigators and the community of Jerome, it seemed that this was a case that would never be solved. And as the years dragged on, the hope for justice seemed to dim, until a break in the case came nearly 30 years after the crime took place. The breakthrough came after Detective Wagner took charge of the case in June 2022. With a fresh perspective and renewed determination, he meticulously reviewed the evidence, seeking overlooked details and potential leads. By the end of July, it became evident that a deeper investigation was warranted. In February 2023, the case was officially reopened, marking a significant milestone in the pursuit of justice for Wilma Moy. The renewed efforts aimed to uncover the truth and bring closure to a long-standing mystery that had haunted the community for years. Then, in March of the same year, the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab delivered a breakthrough. Advancements in DNA technology enabled meticulous analysis of the evidence. This ultimately led to the conclusive identification of Kennison as the perpetrator. For Wilma's family, the truth behind who committed such a heinous crime brings a bittersweet solace, providing a semblance of peace after years of questions and anguish. It took nearly 30 years for Wilma's case to be solved, and yet there is still a small sense of injustice. Even with the confirmation that her neighbor, Danny Lee Kennison, was the perpetrator, his fate was not yet known. Brings no retribution for her loved ones. In 2001, Kennison took his own life and evaded the consequences of his actions, denying Wilma's family the opportunity for proper closure through the justice system. In In 1984, Donna Mako stayed with her family in New Jersey. She was only 19 years old, but worked two glamorous jobs, a legal secretary during the week and a part-time model aiming to be a professional one day. Donna was a beautiful blonde, the kind everyone wanted to be friends with, but her beauty did not stand in the way of her kindness. She lived in East Windsor, Cherrybrook Lane with her mother, Betty, stepfather Ronald, and little sister Julie. Julie not only resembled her sister, but she aimed to be just like her one day. The eldest sister, Toni, had recently moved out, so the Makos were not ready to let go of Donna just yet. Her parents had given Donna the privacy to live in the basement, and she could come and go as she pleased as she had a separate entrance. Would prove to be a vital part of the tragedy that ensued. It was February 26, 1984, a typical Saturday night at home. Donna did not have any plans, but she did have to run an errand for work the next morning. 14-year-old Julie came home and saw her sister's car parked in the driveway, meaning she was home. She was excited as she wanted to spend time with her big sister. Donna let her stay in the basement, watching horror movies till the early morning hours. When it was 2:45 a.m., Julie was done for the night and went up to her room to go to sleep, leaving her big sister watching TV alone. Betty and her husband were asleep in their bedroom, and Julie went to sleep shortly thereafter. There was nothing to suggest a struggle or commotion. The next morning, Donna was missing from the breakfast table. Her family assumed she had gone to work for the office job that was pending. They thought nothing of it, as Donna often came and went as she pleased. The entire day was uneventful and dinner time rolled around. That is when Betty got seriously worried. It was not like Donna to be gone so long without telling her family. She never even stayed the night anywhere. She always had dinner with her family unless she had plans. Betty thought perhaps Donna had come home and she missed it somehow. But as she descended the stairs to her daughter's basement room, she was surprised to see it was a mess. Donna was not there, but everything had been hurriedly tossed around. There were clear signs that there had been a struggle. Donna was a very organized, neat girl, so this was out of character. And that is when her eyes settled on a shocking sight in the corner of the room. It was a pile of bloody clothes. Betty immediately called the police, upset that she had not seen this detail sooner. After some time of searching, investigators recovered Donna's car a mile away from home. The black four-door '79 Chrysler was parked on the side of Millstone Road. Near the Cranberry, all the doors were open. But even more shocking were the bloodstains all over the car. From the upholstery to the ceiling, there was blood everywhere. Officers found her wallet, money, credit cards, and driver's license in the car. The blood from her room and blood from her car were sent for lab testing. A thorough analysis of her room revealed some clues. There was male DNA on some of Donna's clothes. It was obvious that a man had broken into her room and kidnapped her. There was the possibility of assault and the unthinkable. He might have taken Donna's life. The blood from the car and room belonged to Donna. Unfortunately, DNA technology was still in its initial stages, so there was not much to identify the perpetrator. There were no leads to find out where Donna was exactly. Case remained unsolved for months. Where was Donna? The Makos were struck with adversity again 6 months after Donna disappeared when Ronald, their stepfather, passed away. Julie and her mother could not bear such a loss. Toni got married in 1986 and attempted to move on with her life. A year later, in 1987, Betty and Julie moved to Carrollton, Texas. They tried to start over, but it was marred with bad luck. They had kept everything in a storage unit until they settled down, but it was a bad idea. The storage unit was burglarized, leading to 16 boxes of Donna's things being stolen. Mementos, photographs, precious memories were lost. This is a very interesting point, because normally a burglar would not take photographs or files. Betty became grief-stricken after losing her husband and not knowing where her Donna was. In 1990, she passed away as well. Julie was 20 years old when her mother passed. As she took her last few breaths, Betty made Julie promise to never give up on Donna's case, to find her no matter what. A decade later, the sisters finally had an answer. Not necessarily one they liked. On April 2, 1995, 11 years after Donna vanished without a trace, an unexpected discovery was made. A Boy Scouts troop commander, while leading an expedition, stumbled upon a partially dressed skeleton concealed in thick underbrush. The remains were wrapped in a carpet in a wooded area near a cranberry farm. It lay eerily close to the spot where Donna's car had been abandoned years ago. Authorities swiftly responded, and using dental records, they confirmed the remains were indeed those of Donna Mako. The medical examiner initially concluded that she had passed due to a gunshot wound to the head. But back at the lab, a more thorough examination revealed that it was blunt force trauma. Donna Mako's case went from a missing persons case to a slaying. Unfortunately, that was the only progress, a separate classification. The authorities at the time had no idea who did this to Donna. Julie slowly rebuilt her life. She found love, got married, and raised 3 children, while checking up regularly on New Jersey police regarding her sister's case. A few years later, in 2013, Tony, now married as Tony Bartz, passed away as well. She was buried in Little Elm, Texas, where she spent her married life. Tony never did know who took her sister's life so brutally. But a decade later, there was new hope. In 2022, nearly 40 years after the tragic events, the authorities decided to reopen the investigation into Donna Mako's case. Their first step was to send all the original evidence to the Central Regional Laboratory of the State Police of New Jersey. This included DNA samples and fingerprints collected from the scene. In a remarkable breakthrough, the authorities announced in April 2023 that the DNA samples that they had identified Nathaniel Harvey as the person responsible for taking the life of Donna Mako. Harvey, a man with a long history of criminal activity, had already passed away in prison. The crucial evidence came from the male DNA found in Donna's apartment during the initial investigation in 1984. This trace, which had no innocent reason to be there, ultimately led to the long-awaited resolution of the case. It was revealed that Harvey, who worked on the cranberry farm, who had been a person of interest initially, was the perpetrator all along. Officers at the time were unable to build a case against him as there was no DNA technology involved at the time. Harvey was arrested for a series of abuses many times over the years. But one thing that put him behind bars was a horrendous crime he committed in June of 1985. A 37-year-old widow named Irene Schnapps was found slain in the bedroom of her Plainsboro apartment. Her body was discovered by a coworker who, concerned after several days without contact, decided to check on her. Investigators concluded that Irene had been fatally struck on the head with a metal object. They found a bloody fingerprint on her pillow and a footprint on the floor, evidence that painted a grim picture of the crime. The lack of forced entry led the police to believe that Irene's attacker was someone she knew. This line of thinking directed their suspicion toward Peter, a neighbor known to have feelings for Irene. However, despite their initial focus on him, no substantial evidence was found linking Peter to the crime. He was eventually cleared as a suspect. Attention then shifted to Nathaniel Harvey, a notorious criminal known for breaking into homes and attacking women. During questioning, detectives noted that Harvey's shoe size matched the footprint found at the crime scene. Additionally, they discovered a Seiko watch belonging to Irene in Harvey's car. After 3 days of intense interrogation, Harvey confessed to taking her life. However, a critical error occurred. The confession was not recorded. Harvey later recanted his confession, claiming he was not involved in Irene's demise. Despite this, the evidence against Harvey was compelling enough to convict him. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for Irene's slaying. Harvey remained in prison from his arrest in 1985 until he passed away in 2020 in Southwood State Prison, despite multiple appeals. Julie Mako is now Julie Berger. She was 54 years old and a grandmother. She had also been an elected official who served on the council in the town of New Fairview, Texas. She was not expecting to find out the truth about her sister when she got that phone call from New Jersey police. Julie had kept in touch with people in East Windsor through the Heightstown High Memorial page on Facebook to help push her sister's investigation. She sometimes gets angry at herself for not staying up with her sister. Perhaps if she had stayed, would anything have changed? But it is possible that Julie, being a child herself, would have lost her life anyway. For years, her family had gone to trackers, private investigators, and psychics just to know what happened to their lovely Donna. Having a name finally brought some amount of closure to her. Julie will always fondly remember the day when she and her husband went to pick up a small ladybug flew onto her arm, and in a moment of solitude, she truly believed it was Donna reaching out to her, as if she is grateful and finally at peace. On the evening of March 8, 1982, Susanna Brown attended a Tupperware party near their home in Abilene, Texas. Her daughter Francesca stayed at their neighbor Katie Spivey's house. Francesca asked Kathy if she could have a sleepover. Kathy, being a mother, said it was a school night and they could do something over the weekend. After picking up Francesca around 8:30 p.m., Susanna returned with her to their home. The next morning, Billy Brown came home from work. It was nearly 3:20 a.m., and in the dark, he had no idea of what horrors awaited him. As he turned on the light switch, the first thing he saw was blood. And then he saw his wife Susanna lying lifeless, half hidden under the bed. He walked past the living room phone and went to the kitchen to call 911. The officers discovered his 8-year-old stepdaughter, Francesca Antoinette Martinez's body in the house. It was a grim discovery, yet law enforcement officials noticed something odd. Susanna was discovered lying face up in her bedroom with a lamp cord, still attached to the lamp, wrapped around her neck. Her daughter was also a victim of ligature strangulation, found in her bedroom with a phone cord cut in 2 places around her neck. The ligatures used to slay Susanna and Francesca were both items already present in the house, indicating a crime of opportunity rather than premeditated slaying. Strangulation, being a highly expressive and personal means of ending the life of a person, suggests that the suspect likely knew the victims. The medical examiner later announced there was male DNA fluid present in Susanna's mouth. However, it appeared to have been rinsed off so it could be consensual, and there was no way to relate it to the crime in question. There were 3 large lacerations on Susanna's head, meaning whoever strangled her also struck her thrice with the lamp on the left side of her head. Her white V-neck t-shirt was torn a little, as was her bra. Her blue shorts were pulled down and around her ankles, but there was no presence of assault. It was noted that little Francesca had been hiding under the bed. The way her body was found, it appeared the attacker found and dragged her out. Interestingly, Billy told police at the time that the back door was slightly open and a window was open 5 to 6 inches. This looked staged, as all the screen doors were intact, in fact, shut. Officers could find no signs of breaking and entering, not even a scratch on the door, and there was nothing missing from the house. For a man struck with such misfortune, Billy seemed unfazed. He was calm, not too upset, and even made inappropriate dad jokes. That is when he turned from the affected loved one to their number 1 suspect. Investigators first wanted to know more about Susanna Flores Brown. For parents Nick Flores and Frances Soda, Susanna was a Texas girl through and through, born on October 20, 1951 in Taylor County, Texas. She had 2 sisters, a half-sister and a half-brother. Susanna was loved and adored by all. When she was only 16 years old, she fell in love, but the man she chose was 10 years older than her, 26-year-old Freddie Martinez. In 1967, they got married. They were blissfully married for a long time. Freddie was in the Marine Corps, a lance corporal in the U.S. Army. He served in the Vietnam War up until 1973, when the war was over. For Freddie, 1973 would turn out to be an eventful year. In January, as the Paris Peace Accords were signed and troops were withdrawn, Freddie lost his father. But by the end of the year, some light came into his life. On December 11, 1973, he was blessed in the form of little Francesca Antoinette Martinez, his baby girl. Francesca was affectionately known as Cha-Cha because of her fun spirit. She studied at Bonham Elementary School in Abilene. The mother and daughter were happy and loved, but unfortunately, as often happens with teen marriages, their marriage did not work out. The couple separated with Susanna keeping Francesca. Susanna was very busy with her daughter, who loved to dance and be involved in just about everything. For a while, it was just the 2 of them until 1979 when Billy Brown entered their lives. One night at a nightclub, she met a handsome man who took her heart. Billy worked at New Corp and appeared to be a loving family man. Susanna's sisters noticed the relationship turning sour very quickly. He was a flirt and a womanizer. Linda Flores and Rita Flores Lafferty believed he was cheating on her. Repeatedly. Susanna tried to attribute it to them being racist and even explained how he was different and kind, but the sisters still did not like him. Once they were all out with their dates at a nightclub when Linda came across the couple arguing. She saw Billy push Susanna hard, knocking her down. The couple had been in a relationship for around 3 years. Susanna's family described Billy as controlling and abusive. Susanna was in significant danger from Billy, as detailed by her siblings. Richard Flores, Susanna's half-brother, arrived at the crime scene after hearing about the double slaying. He noticed that Billy did not show any remorse at all, and was laughing and joking about a bottle of whiskey Richard had left there about a week before. For Richard, the way Billy distanced himself from any emotions at all was a big red flag. Rowan Flores Beats, Susanna's half-sister, recalled Susanna expressing reluctance about being intimate with Billy. Susanna mentioned that Billy could become ugly or moody, and make short and snotty remarks throughout the day if she did not perform in bed to his liking. The news of Susanna wanting to leave the relationship, coupled with Billy's alleged anger over intimacy issues, helped investigators identify a possible motive. Billy told the police that he had been trying to call Susanna for quite a while before he was finally able to get a hold of her. When Susanna did not answer the phone, his feelings of insecurity, jealousy, and control took over, sparking an argument that escalated into something more serious. Sarah Sato, a close cousin of Susanna, told investigators that in the summer of 1981, she escorted Susanna to the hospital. Susanna allegedly claimed that she and Billy Brown got into a fight that led to her suffering a miscarriage. The officers strongly believed there was physical abuse in the relationship. Things got heated often, and investigators discovered Susanna had once called the police in November of 1981, afraid of Billy. They had a domestic issue, and allegedly Billy had gone to see another woman. He laughed it off with the police, saying Susanna had poured dirt in his car's gas tank as revenge. Then, realizing it was too much and perhaps she crossed a line, she called the police, fearing Billy's reaction. Susanna confided in her family that she did not want to marry Billy or live in Texas due to the common law marriage laws. While Susanna and Billy were not married by Texas laws, there was intent to marry and they were living together for some time, so she was considered his common law wife. But Susanna's unwillingness was evident. According to court documents, she refused to take his last name until shortly before her end, only doing so under his pressure. A few weeks before her untimely end, Susanna asked her mother for money to change the locks. About a week before the tragedy, she asked her siblings if they could get her a gun. Richard Flores further explained that he knew something nobody else did. Susanna was trying to leave Billy, and he was very upset about it, threatening her. She went to Richard, told him everything, and asked him to help her buy a gun. It was almost as if Susanna knew something, as if she knew what was to come. As investigators zeroed in on Billy interrogating him, he produced an alibi. He claimed he left for his job at the New Corp Manufacturing Company at around 4:30 p.m. on March 8. He clocked in at 5 p.m. and clocked out at 3 a.m. the following morning. Investigators met with his alibi, Josie Landeros, a New Corp employee. It was rumored that Billy Brown was cheating on Susanna with Josie. Josie was cooperative and admitted it would be easy for Billy to slip out of work as the nature of his job allowed him to leave undetected. Other employees, including co-workers named James Coffey and Larry Skiles, confirmed it was highly possible, which further reduced Billy's alibi. Back in 1982, Billy could not be convicted due to lack of evidence. They, in fact, did possess evidence. It just needed DNA analysis. The case ended up in the unsolved pile until years later in 2012 when Abilene police asked Billy to come in for an interview. He did not show up or agree to give a DNA sample. 10 years later, on the 17th of January 2023, the oral swab from Susanna's mouth was processed, and there was no question it was Billy. The investigators wanted to speak to Billy. They confronted him outside his house, but he took it very lightly. Billy sat down for a 2-hour interview with the police, where he denied all allegations and said he loved his wife. He denied any domestic violence. He also denied any miscarriage, saying Susanna had an abortion in 1981 by her own will. When he denied giving a DNA sample, he was served a warrant, and the DNA sample was taken by force. Billy was reportedly heard saying, "I have signed my own ending." He also claimed that since breaks at work were only 30 minutes long, he could not have since it took 18 minutes to drive one way. He also passionately denied any relations with Susanna, saying he did not enjoy this particular act in bed. He was not aware that the officers had carried out a DNA analysis. It was Billy's bodily fluid in Susanna's mouth. Despite this, he profusely denied having done the deed with Susanna. He also said that it was possible Susanna was cheating on him with her ex at the time, trying to turn the police elsewhere. He said he got fried chicken for dinner, ate with his family, and left for work. When officers asked him why he did not call the police from the living room phone, he did not miss a beat, and retorted with, "Did Francesca not have a phone cord around her neck?" There was no question about it. The perpetrator was Billy. Officers then had a clear picture. Billy had calculated the entire thing, slipped out of work, and taken Susanna's life. He then slayed Francesca, leaving no witness behind. On October 27, 2023, 2 days after speaking with Susanna's sisters, police arrested Billy Brown on the charges of ending someone's life, but he was released on a $200,000 bond the very next day. Billy said he suspected Susanna was cheating on him with her ex, and that was the only thing he was concerned about knowing all these years later. When reporters tried to get him to say something, Billy simply laughed it off. Susanna's sister, Linda, tearfully said the following, "There is no way they can do this. It has been 41 years. To hear this news, it is just unbelievable. It is like a dream. A trial date has yet to be set for the case. 41 years later, Susanna and Francesca just might get justice after all." On May 12, 1994, 46-year-old Bert Allman was slain at his home at 2510 Stargrass Circle in South Austin, Texas. When he came home from work, there was a burglar inside his home. The burglar then stabbed Bert multiple times in the foyer of the home. He succumbed to his injuries in the entryway. He was later found there by his wife. In 1994, Austin Police Department, Lieutenant David Parkinson called the case unusual. He said in most property crimes, the offender would normally flee the scene. They would not become involved in any kind of confrontation with the homeowner. Shortly after the crime happened, news crews spoke to Bert's neighbors. Neighbor Kathy Torrey said, "It was the time of day when children could have been coming home from school. Definitely people coming home from work. There was just a lot of risk with being in a house at that time. It does make it scary." The police believed that the suspect had escaped out of the back door of Bert's house and into the woods behind the home. Bert's perpetrator was injured as he left the home, leaving blood inside for the detectives to collect. But unfortunately, due to a lack of advanced forensic technologies, the case went cold. In 2005, after Austin Police Department's cold case unit was established, the detectives discovered that there was DNA in evidence in connection with this case. The DNA was sent off to the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, to have an original DNA profile completed. That profile was then uploaded to Cody's. It did not turn up a match. In March 2023, the single-source DNA from the case was sent to Bode Technology. Nearly 30 years had passed since the case began. Sergeant Rodriguez said more than 20 detectives worked to solve the case. More than 40 people were looked at as possible suspects. 3 months later, the company returned results to the Austin Police Department, identifying a possible suspect. The suspect was Kenneth Wayne Robbins. He was 22 years old at the time of the crime. The detectives worked over the next couple of months to establish whether Robbins was in Austin at the time of Bert's slaying. Detectives learned that he was living in Lubbock, Texas. He worked as a long-haul truck driver. Detectives tried to work with the Texas Rangers and the DPS Criminal Investigations Division to collect DNA from Robbins. The attempts were unsuccessful, so an Austin Police Department detective wrote a search warrant for Robbins and drove to Lubbock. On September 8, 2023, detectives found Robbins at his work. They served the search warrant and took a sample of his DNA. Robbins refused to speak with the detectives. A few days later, on September 13th, the Austin Police Department was contacted by the owners of the trucking company Robbins worked for. They said their truck was parked at a truck stop in Weatherford, Texas. They said the truck has not moved for a suspicious amount of time. They contacted Weatherford police to do a welfare check. They found Robbins lifeless in his truck. An autopsy later revealed he took his own life. Sergeant Rodriguez said Robbins lived in Austin at the time of Bert's slaying, and he is believed to be the person responsible for his demise. Austin Police Department had written a capital slaying warrant for Robbins. They intended to arrest him and bring him back to Travis County to answer to the charges in the court system. On February 8, 2024, the Austin Police Department classified the cold case as closed. Sergeant Rodriguez said, "Mr. Mann is survived by his wife and his sister, and they are happy enough to have an answer as to the who. I do not know that they will ever have an answer as to the why, and I do not know, quite honestly, if any of those answers would ever be sufficient for their grief." Rodriguez said while DNA is an important tool in investigators' toolboxes, it is not quite an answer. Cases like this still need hard work on behalf of detectives in order to be solved. Kathy May, Bert's younger sister, said it has been emotional hearing the news almost 30 years later. She said she felt like she could walk past Robbins on the street and not even know it. She continued saying that they do not have that big question hanging over their hearts. She had really kind of given up hope that it would happen. She is very grateful that it did. Kathy added that even though her family can begin healing, she feels deep sadness for Robbins' family after finding out the news all these years later. She said, "They stay on my mind all the time because I cannot imagine learning this after nearly 30 years within your son, husband and father's background." On March 24, 2012, at 3:36 a.m., 34-year-old Julio Torres was shot and slain while sitting inside his vehicle in the parking lot of the West Reading Diner in West Reading, Pennsylvania. About 2 months later, on May 9, Jomaine Case, who was 22 at the time, was arrested in connection to the shooting. Investigators later determined that Case was not the person that shot Julio. He was, however, involved in the incident. He was convicted for his involvement. Case and an unidentified gunman had argued with Julio in the parking lot of the diner. Julio was then shot and slain shortly after. There was no information that indicated that Julio knew Case or the unidentified gunman prior to the shooting. Surveillance video from the diner showed Case and the unidentified gunman holding styrofoam cups just before the shooting. Those cups, including one with a bitten-off piece, were collected from the crime scene as evidence. The cups and bitten piece were sent to the Pennsylvania State Police Forensic Crime Laboratory for DNA analysis. An unknown man's DNA profile was developed from the bitten-off piece, but did not match any of the samples contained within existing DNA databases. Another DNA profile, which was linked to Case, was also found on one of the styrofoam cups. The investigation revealed that the gunman was from New York City. He was visiting the area of Reading, Pennsylvania on the night of the shooting. The gunman remained unidentified and the case went cold for several years. In 2023, the investigation was reviewed and re-examined by the Berks County Detectives Unit and West Reading Police Department as part of a cold case initiative launched by the Berks County District Attorney's Office. A picture of the alleged gunman was taken with a cell phone in 2012 at a party before Julio's slaying. The photo was extracted from the phone and retained by investigators. In November 2023, investigators used facial recognition software to help identify the person in the photo. Investigators later determined that 39-year-old Vallis Slaughter was the person in the picture. He was originally from Brooklyn, New York. 1 month later, in December, Slaughter was found living with his mother in Jersey City, New Jersey. Investigators then conducted surveillance at the Jersey City address. 2 months later, on February 9, 2024, investigators spotted Slaughter walking on the sidewalk. He was smoking a cigarette on the 200 block of Fulton Avenue in Jersey City. Before entering his mother's home, Slaughter threw his cigarette onto the sidewalk. The cigarette butt, which was still smoldering, was then collected by detectives. It was sent to the Pennsylvania State Police Forensic Crime Laboratory for DNA comparison to the DNA profile that was initially developed in the case. In March 2024, the laboratory told investigators that the DNA extracted from the cigarette but matched the DNA profile initially identified on the bitten piece of the styrofoam cup. An arrest warrant for Slaughter was obtained on March 18 by West Reading Police and the Berks County District Attorney's Detectives Unit. He was taken into custody 2 days later at around 6:15 a.m. by Jersey City Police at his mother's home. He is charged with slaying, criminal conspiracy, aggravated assault, and other related offenses. Slaughter is being held at the Hudson County Correctional Facility in New Jersey and is awaiting extradition to Berks County, Pennsylvania. On October 10, 2005, baby Skylar was found wrapped in newspapers and a towel. She was stuffed in a hotel plastic bag in a trash can in a Terminal 4 women's restroom at the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport in Arizona. She was found by staff that went to help a passenger try to find a missing laptop. As the maintenance workers were going through the trash in a bathroom on the ticketing level, they discovered a black garbage bag stuffed with hotel monogram towels. Investigators believe baby Skylar lived for just 24 hours before she was abandoned at the airport. Although she had only been deceased for a matter of hours, the infant's hair and eye color, height, weight, and cause of demise have never been made public. The medical examiner later determined that baby Skylar lost her life from asphyxiation, launching a slaying investigation. Troy Hillman, a retired cold case detective with the Phoenix Police Department who worked on the case for years, described the discovery as divine intervention. Hillman said that if the businessman had not lost his laptop, baby Skylar likely never would have been found. The investigators searched 3 local hotels for guest lists and surveillance. The trail went cold and they were unable to trace the baby's mother. They suspected the woman had boarded a plane and fled the state after leaving the deceased newborn behind. Hillman said, "She just literally was welcomed into the world only to be slain. It was just horrific." For years, detectives worked the case. Hillman's team joined forces with Parabon Nanolabs in 2017 to create a composite image of what the mother may look like based on DNA collected from the baby. In November 2021, after 16 years, there was finally a break in the case. The FBI helped officers use genetic genealogy to find a maternal match for the victim. That was cross-referenced with DNA collected from the scene. They identified someone in the family tree. That person consented to a DNA sample, which led the investigation further to 51-year-old Annie Anderson. In January 2022, the police served a search warrant and interviewed Anderson. She confirmed she was the baby's mother. Court documents show plainclothes officers asking Anderson to come outside her home in Arlington, Washington to look at her car. That was when the police arrested her, just 3 days before Christmas 2023, without incident. She was jailed in Washington. She was then extradited to Arizona and booked into Maricopa County Jail. Hillman expressed his frustration knowing that the baby girl could have survived if Anderson had dropped her off at a hospital instead of leaving her behind. Lieutenant James Hester of the Phoenix Police Department explained that Anderson was visiting the city in October 2005 for a real estate boot camp. He said she gave birth to Skylar at another location before dumping her in the airport bathroom. Anderson is accused of multiple criminal offenses, including slaying and abandonment or concealment of a deceased body. Police know who the father of baby Skylar is. They do not believe that Skylar's father was involved, and Anderson faces first-degree slaying charges. During Anderson's April 2024 hearing, new information was released. She said she gave birth in a hotel room, claiming that the baby was stillborn and delivered into a bathtub filled with water. However, the report says her claims were inconsistent with the medical examiner. The trial or sentencing date must still be announced. Is buried at Paradise Memorial Gardens in Scottsdale, Arizona. On October 25, 1991, Newport, Rhode Island resident Brent Davis was shot and slain at the Brick and Wood Housing Project. After Brent's demise, witnesses identified the suspect as an individual named Bobby. Investigators then created a sketch composite of the suspect. They were able to identify two of his relatives who were living in New Bedford. The relatives told investigators that Bobby was also known as Ronaldo Suriel. He was from New York City, but authorities were ultimately unable to find the suspect. The case went cold with no arrests made. The case remained frozen until 2020, when the district attorney's cold case unit began looking at it again. According to the district attorney's office, State Police Trooper Catherine Sullivan soon determined that Ronaldo Suriel was likely also an alias and began interviewing witnesses and others known to associate with Bobby. Through the interviews, investigators learned that the shooting was a result of an illegal substance distribution dispute. They also discovered that Bobby was originally from the Dominican Republic. He fled the city shortly after Brent's demise. One witness admitted to investigators that at the time of the shooting, he and Bobby had been selling illegal substances together. After the shooting, the witness told authorities and told him Brent was not alive anymore and that he needed to leave New Bedford. Sullivan soon tracked down and spoke to a close relative of the suspect who previously lived in New Bedford. The relative identified Claudio Jorge as the person behind both aliases. They also provided investigators with photos of him that matched the composite sketch from 1991. While Jorge was incarcerated multiple times before Brent's slaying, records show that he was free at the time of the shooting. Additionally, investigators obtained photos of Jorge from the relative and showed them to witnesses. The witnesses confirmed that Jorge and Bobby were the same person and that he had shot Brent. On January 29, 2024, the district attorney's office said in a news release that they believe Claudio Jorge, a Dominican Republic native with a long criminal history, was responsible for the slaying. Jorge was arrested in New York in 1992. He was then deported to the Dominican Republic in 1998. He was 40 years old when he was slain there in 2006. At the time of his demise, someone was trying to rob him. District Attorney Thomas Quinn said in the release, "This case further shows our office does not give up on solving cold cases, and will continue to put resources into investigations of cold cases." On May 6, 2008, Sha Stevens from Lorain County, Ohio was brutally shot in the back. She was beaten and assaulted. She was then stuffed into the trunk of a car and left till she lost her life behind an abandoned building. Sha was 43 at the time. She was hiking in the Carlisle Reservation. She was picking mushrooms like she normally did when she was attacked without warning. Matthew Plass, then 25, passed by Sha while she was hiking near the duck pond in the Metro Parks. As he walked past her, he greeted her and said something like, "Nice day, is it not?" She went to turn around and he then shot her in the back without warning. He then beat her, attempted to rob her and assaulted her. Then he put her in the trunk of his car after he believed she was no longer alive. She was still alive and able to attract the attention of passersby. As they called police, Ploys drove off at high speed. He then dumped her behind a closed business on Oberlin-Elyria Road. Plass pleaded guilty in November 2009 to charges of kidnapping, aggravated robbery, attempted slaying and felonious assault, and was sentenced to 33 years in prison. The attack left the mother of 4 and grandmother of 7 paralyzed from the waist down. She spent most of her time in bed or a wheelchair. She was in constant pain. Lorain County Prosecutor J.D. Tomlinson said, "It has just haunted me. Every time I drive by the duck pond, I think about the matter." He also said the attack appeared to be random. Sha herself said that the 33-year prison term handed down to Place was not nearly enough years in prison. She said, "I wish the judge would have shown him the same mercy he showed me, which was none." Sha passed away on December 29, 2019 at the age of 55. Lorain County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller ruled her demise as a result of complications from the 2008 attack. The month after her demise, her husband, Mark Stevens, said he wanted Plius to serve more time in jail. Mark passed away in July 2020, 7 months after his wife's demise. Sha's daughter, Carol Schaefer of Fairview Park, echoed her mother's sentiments. She said, 33 years is not enough. He just had gotten out of jail when he did this. He is a Tier 3 offender. Do you think he is not going to come out and do it again? And he cannot even say sorry. Carol was unofficially adopted by Sean at 4 years old. She said her mother was there for every major moment in her life, from her first fight in school to the birth of her first child. Sean suffered nerve damage from the attack. She was bedridden and in pain for more than a decade because of it. Plows robbed her of time in her children's and grandchildren's lives. She never got to take her grandchildren to the zoo or the duck pond she loved to visit. After Sean's demise, Prosecutor Tomlinson says the case was then sent to former Lorain County Prosecutor Dennis Will for review. It was never sent to the grand jury. Tomlinson said, though I was unaware of it, the Sha Stevens matter stalled again. Fast forward to late 2023, the Stevens family reached out to the prosecutor's office seeking an update on the status of the case. Tomlinson said the files was then quickly located. He saw the case was assigned for evaluation and referral to the grand jury. Tomlinson said Pless was indicted on slaying charges in the case. Tomlinson said the reason we can bring this charge is because Assistant Prosecutor Peter Gothia refused to plea bargain the first case. And thus, when Sean passed away, we had the element we needed to charge the slaying. An indictment handed up on February 21st charges, 41-year-old Place, with 4 counts of slaying, all with firearm specifications, court records show. He is currently incarcerated at Mansfield Correctional Institution. No new trial date is set for Ploss. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison with the opportunity for parole. Tomlinson said, although justice has been delayed in this case, it will not be denied. We are going forward. Court records show Ploss pleaded not guilty when he was arraigned in the slaying case in April 2024. A judge will decide whether the accused perpetrator, Matthew Ploss, currently serving a 33-year prison sentence for the 2008 attack that severely injured Sha Stevens, will continue to face slaying charges, or if those charges are forbidden by law under double jeopardy. On January 13, 2013, 3 people from Montgomery, Alabama, were found deceased inside a silver Dodge Charger along Interstate 85 ramp in Union City. An officer stumbled upon the car, sitting idly on the northbound exit ramp. Inside the car were the bodies of 32-year-old Cheryl Colquitt Thompson, 33-year-old Quinones King, and 43-year-old Rodney Cottrell. Cheryl was found deceased in the trunk from strangulation. Quinones and Rodney were found lifeless from asphyxiation in the back seat. It was determined that all 3 victims were tortured and slain in Clayton County, then dumped in Fulton County. The victims were lured to a residence on Magnolia Drive in Jonesboro. They were then forced into the home at gunpoint and then tortured and slain. They were later loaded into the Dodge and taken to Fulton where the vehicle was dumped. The families of the victims had suspected that their slayings were a setup. Due to a lack of evidence, the case remained unsolved and went cold until a breakthrough finally came. On May 8, 2024, the sheriff's office obtained 12 slaying warrants for the suspects. They immediately started locating them, for people have been arrested in connection to the case. The suspects were taken into custody in Alabama, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Officers did not say how the 4 suspects were tied to the case. Details about their arrest have also not been released. Keontae Harris, Kevin Harris, Kenneth Thompson, and Daryl Adams have been arrested. They are all charged with 3 counts of malice slaying. One of the suspects, Keontae Harris, is an assistant principal at McCattery Middle School in Jefferson County, Alabama. He has been placed on paid administrative leave while he is being investigated. Superintendent Walter Gonsolin said as more facts become available, they will act according to their district's policy. 11 years after the slaying, Tony Garrett with Central Alabama Crime Stoppers still remembers the pain the victims' families felt. Garrett and his team are trying to see if their efforts helped lead to the arrests. He said, so we are waiting for them to get back to us to see if they had a tipster or if they had information come in to solve the case. Garrett said, no matter how old the case is, it is still approached with the same urgency. Thanks to new technology, many more cases are being solved. Law enforcement agencies in Clayton County, Georgia are leading the investigation. So far, It is not known what led investigators to the suspects. Crime Stoppers is in touch with the victims' families. They say they will speak out when they are ready. A grand jury indicted Keontae Harris, Daryl Adams, Kenneth Thompson, and Kevin Harris. The date of their next court appearance must still be announced. On November 17, 2017, 15-year-old December 2 was working at a Kansas City, Kansas laundromat when he was fatally shot. A fellow employee found December deceased inside the Maple Hill laundromat, located in the 2400 block of South 34th Street the following morning. December was a sophomore at Harmon High School. December's family immigrated to the United States from Myanmar when he was just 6 years old. They fled to avoid the violence in their home country. Family and friends remember December as a bright and talented student, singer, son, brother, and athlete. He was fluent in English, his second language. He aspired of someday becoming a mixed martial arts fighter. He was a member of the J.C. Harmon High School wrestling team, where his daring style earned him a reputation in his freshman year. The team had just finished its first week of practice when he passed away. There were no eyewitnesses to the shooting. Evidence collected during the investigation included shell casings and grainy surveillance footage. Detectives were frustrated by the case. The security camera system inside the laundromat that night was not working. Security cameras across the street were also not set to record. The only camera system that did work was too far away and pointed in the wrong direction, which was not much help. Leads proved tough to come by, and the case quickly went cold. A new cold case detective was assigned to the case in May of 2024. Detective Lily Sook began conducting more interviews. She searched through what little video footage was left from the night of the shooting. In June 2024, there was a breakthrough. Detective Sook was able to connect a vehicle captured in exterior footage from the scene to Luis Samano, placing him at the crime scene. Samano is a 24-year-old man who was around 16 or 17 years old at the time of the shooting. Online records with the Kansas Department of Corrections show that he has been held at the state facility since 2019 on 2 felony arson convictions in Johnson County. Samano had an extensive criminal history in Johnson County before and after December's slaying. He was charged with a series of burglaries involving washers and dryers at apartment complexes in 2014 and again in 2015. Samano was sentenced to 9 years and 5 months in state prison in March 2019 for the burglary charges. It is unclear if Samano was charged with any crimes in Wyandotte County as a juvenile. In 2021, the police recovered a gun during an illegal substance-related arrest in Lenexa. A detective assigned to the case interviewed the gun owner, who said Samano had stolen it. In 2022, a forensic lab test by the KBI confirmed the gun was the weapon used in the shooting, but police lacked any evidence at the time that placed Samano at the crime scene. On July 11, 2024, Samano was charged with slaying and attempted aggravated robbery by the Wyandotte County District Attorney's Office in the slaying of December. He was being held at the Larne State Mental Health Facility following a conviction in a separate case. Detective Sook said that they believe there was not really a motive for the shooting. They believe it was just a robbery that had gone wrong. A family statement said, "December is loved and is deeply missed by his family, friends, and community. He always smiled, had a positive energy, and always participated in his community, including his church youth camp and Bible study. We want to thank the community and the police department for looking at the case again. We understand it is pretty hard to get cold cases solved. In our culture, we had never experienced something like this because our caring community was fairly new to the U.S. We think it is wonderful and are grateful for the work that detectives did." On July 15, 1990, officers with the DeKalb County Police Department, DKPD, responded to a report of a stabbing at an apartment complex on Tree Hills Parkway in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Upon arriving, DKPD officers found 43-year-old Pamela Sumpter at a neighbor's apartment. She was assaulted and stabbed. Her 46-year-old brother, John Sumpter, had also been stabbed. John was found deceased in the apartment that the siblings shared. Pamela was transported to an area hospital where an assault kit was collected. The kit was found to include male DNA belonging to her attacker. While hospitalized, Pamela was interviewed by DKPD officers. She provided them with a detailed description of the man who attacked her and took her brother's life. She told investigators that the man was a new acquaintance of her brother. She said he was from Detroit, Michigan. Pamela succumbed to her injuries 21 days later on August 5, 1990. The case unfortunately went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In 2022, state investigators sent the kit for testing. In February 2023, the DNA from the kit was uploaded to a statewide DNA database. Unfortunately, there was no match. County District Attorney's Office worked with the GBI to upload the STR DNA profile for the unknown male suspect at the national level. They received a match to an unprosecuted 1992 assault case from Detroit, Michigan. At the same time, with no match to a known individual, the DeKalb County District Attorney's Office teamed with the Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help to identify the unknown suspect in the case. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct genealogy research, ultimately providing new investigative leads to law enforcement. Paired with the case file from the 1990 unprosecuted assault, investigators identified a likely suspect in the case, 55-year-old Kenneth Perry of Loganville, Georgia. On June 6, 2024, members of the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office Fugitive Unit executed an arrest warrant, and Perry was taken into custody without incident. Investigators collected a DNA sample from Perry to confirm that he was the perpetrator in the 1990 case. The DNA sample collected from Perry at the time of his arrest matched to the DNA sample collected in Pamela Sumpter's 1990 assault kit. A DeKalb County grand jury has indicted Perry on 2 counts of malice slaying, 2 counts of felony slaying, assault, 4 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of aggravated battery, 2 counts of possession of a knife during the commission of a felony, and theft by taking, all in connection with the 1990 assault and slaying of 43-year-old Pamela Sumpter and the slaying of her brother, 46-year-old John Sumpter. Perry is in custody at the DeKalb County Jail where he is being held without bond. The victim's brother, James Sumpter, said, "It has been over 30 years since this terrible evil tragedy happened to my brother and sister. We now have closure. I pray that the justice system prevails. Anyone who believes they may have information about Kenneth Perry or the slayings of John and Pamela Sumpter is encouraged to call the District Attorney's Cold Case Tip Line at 404-371-2444.